you gotta listen to this background because it's amazing. So Anna holds a PhD in political science. Listen to this, I'm so excited. She's currently working at the Data Tank, which is an organization championing a holistic approach to reusing data for the common good. And previously she's been at the Ada Lovelace Institute, at the Democratic Society. So, my goodness, sorry, there's so much here. Senior Research Manager at BBC Media Action, just like, y'all, this is gonna be a good one. We're gonna talk about hype and AI, but you don't have to hear it from me. Let's give it up for Anna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. You can hear me? Yeah, great, perfect. So thank you so much for inviting me and spend time with you and have the opportunity to speak. I know it's a privilege, so I hope to use it well. And you know, when Lou asked earlier, if there was a time when you didn't know how to code. So I still don't know. Maybe this makes me the odd one. So yeah, it might be a bit of a different kind of perspective, but I think that's what's nice about this conference, that, we can mix up. So I should first say who I am, where I come from, because our experiences, our backgrounds really shape our view of the world and what we think is the way forward. So I currently co-lead the Data Tank, which is a non-profit that is trying to make the case through research and engagement for a more responsible reuse of data. I'm a social science researcher from Barcelona, although I've been living in London for 18 years now. And the last job I had in London was with the Ada Lovelace Institute, which is a research institute that's also doing social science research to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. And actually, it was the latest director of the Ada Lovelace Institute, Fran Bennett, who linked me up with Heart of Closure. For the last 15 years, I've been working as a researcher at the intersections of democratic processes, SMS technology, instant messaging platforms, and more recently, AI-driven systems. And, as I was preparing this talk, I remember a blog post that I wrote 12 years ago, and it was titled, "Tech is great, but it's people that count." It was not my sentence, it was a sentence by someone in an event that I was summarizing in that blog post. But that was in the context of another cycle of hype that was at the time of civic tech, or ICT4D, ICTs for development. I don't know if any of you have worked in this field, but basically it was very prominent in the field of international development, where tech was seen in the funding, in the conversations, as the solution for solving everything, governance problems, climate change adaptation, public health issues. So, it should make us think that my message for you today has not really changed that much. Although, of course, the technologies have changed a lot. And, that's what hopefully we are going to discuss and I'm going to talk about today. We are going through unprecedented times, I think, in the scale and the pace of tech development. But still, these developments and the decisions around them are still being made by a few big tech companies, a few people running them in still, I think, by large regulatory vacuum. Thankfully, there's a larger community and communities of tech developers, I think like this one, that I think can claim back the authority, if, it refuses to be blinded by the hype, if it focuses on evidence and ethics over magic, if you commit to working collaboratively with other disciplines, other people, different companies, etc., civil society organizations, governments, so that, we can use tech to help people maybe make this society better. So my first point today is about technological determinism. This idea that technology will solve everything, that it's kind of this objective, unmistakable kind of tool that we have. And, some people believe that in good faith, but the thing is, it's actually a very powerful narrative that serves some people and some companies and some powers very well. And I think the problems we have today are really about power, about unequal distribution of wealth, about values that are led by a type of global capitalism rather than other different type of principles. Let me give you an example of this kind of tech determinism. You might have heard of the British Post Office Horizon scandal in the UK. So between 1999 and 2015, 900 post office workers were convicted of theft and fraud based on a faulty accounting software called Horizon that was developed by Fujitsu. The scandal led to wrongful convictions, imprisonments, bankruptcies. Also, people took away their lives, and there's also a public inquiry that started, I think, 4 years ago, and it's still ongoing. Fujitsu, many post office workers repeatedly said they didn't do anything wrong, the software was not working. And Fujitsu was aware of the bugs in the system as early as 1999, but they didn't disclose those problems. And the post office insisted that the problem were the people and not the software. And they did not disclose these problems either in the criminal or civil cases. So, also the developer team did not do anything to change this assumption that surely it must be the people who are wrong, And as I said, the court cases led to loss of livelihoods, breakups in families, really serious consequences. This software did not even involve AI, at least not as we understand it today, but things went really horribly wrong. And it shows how when we have more faith in technology than humans and the consequences that this can have. And as I said, it's a very powerful and dangerous narrative to let people to believe that tech, will certainly always be right. So now, let's imagine what might happen if technologies like this involve AI. So let me give you a couple of examples as well. You might have heard of the Dutch childcare benefits scandal. So the country's tax authorities used an algorithm to create fraud risk profiles among citizens applying for childcare benefits, and families were penalized based purely on suspicions that the algorithm had flagged, based on indicators like, for example, having dual nationality. And tens of thousands of people were pushed into poverty due to debts to the tax agency. Children were taken into foster care, and also some people took away their lives. And there's more similar cases to this. Very briefly, I don't know if you've heard of the RoboDebt case in Australia. It was an automated government scheme which incorrectly demanded welfare recipients to pay back the benefits. And it meant that thousands of people also went in debt based on an incorrect algorithm. And it also led to illness and also suicide. So, in all these cases, it was humans who decided what indicators should be introduced in the self-learning algorithm, humans who implemented it without, it looks like, the necessary safety checks and measures in place, and it were humans who decided to apply these penalties on people. But, I think these two more AI-based cases show another layer to technological determinism, which is, I think, has consequences for how we live together and how we organize our societies. And that's that technological determinism today. It's not only about this blind faith in technology over humanity and social complexity, but it's also about replacing identities and facts with data labels. And these data labels do not necessarily reflect these identities and these facts. And here, there's this quote by John Chinelli-Polt who says, "Our data is spoken for louder than we can speak, and it's spoken for in its own terms." And I think that's really important. Today we become the data tax. We are in many decision processes. The data as it is labeled based on who we might be or what we might do rather than on who we are, on what we do. That's another quote from Sasha Costanza. They say algorithm developers and the banks that employ them use machine learning techniques to produce risk constructs that don't have clearly defined real-world variables, but are actually stand-ins for race, class, gender, disability, and other axes of oppression. The erasure of history and the failure to consider intersectional structural inequality underpins the pretense of fairness in such decision-making support systems. So, of course, technologies are not neutral, precisely because they are designed, developed, applied, regulated, and monitored by humans, and they also have specific affordances that relate to their materiality and how we interact with this materiality. So they do have consequences for good and for bad. And in a data-fied society that we live in today, I think these consequences are only amplified. And I think that's why your jobs are so important and more important, I think. I think there's a lot of power on how you put intention in your work, in how you code, in how you work with others in society, other disciplines, skills, and communities. Some tasks can allow for a narrow focus. Does this pipeline work or not? How do I solve this bug? But I think more and more, that's not enough. And we need to broaden, all of us, whatever field we work in, our frames of mind, being aware of how a line of code might be reproducing inequalities and bias, or to put it positively, how a line of code can embed equity and justice in it. So I think this shift of working, from kind of a narrow focus to a more broadened way is really important, because many governments and public administration today are really being led to put a lot of hope in AI systems. They are working with a very tight budgets to deliver social services, public services. And many do not really understand how some AI-driven systems work. Many of us don't. But there's really a lot of power now in the narrative that AI will solve problems. In the UK, we've already heard many times that AI will solve the NHS crisis. The NHS is the public healthcare system. And it's really not a problem, a crisis that AI can solve. AI might help to streamline some processes, to gain some efficiencies here and there, but it's really not going to be able to tackle the deep inequalities that we're facing. And in this sense, I also wanted to share this quote by Dan McKillen, who said, despite its claim to assist or even automate the production of policy solutions, AI is incapable of addressing the tricky structural issues that impede actual change. What it offers instead is a performative fix that both obscures and amplifies the underlying problems. So I've raised kind of this point about the risks of technological determinism. And I wanted now to flag some specific risks related to data-driven AI. Not because I'm a pessimist, there is evidence for them, but also we're against a big balloon of hype that I think between all of us need to pop. By the way, there are some data sets that are trying to map out and keep track of the potential risks, examples of those risks. Here's just two, one by Mozilla and one at MIT, so feel free to browse and have a look yourselves. But I'm not going to spend too much on the risks because of time. I just want to map them, make sure they are on our radar. I'm sure they won't be a surprise to you either. There's different levels of evidence of the extent of these risks in different societies, in different contexts, but I think we need to be aware of them. And before you think that I am only focusing on the negatives, let me clear this now. I do think that there is a lot of potential on some AI technologies, maybe not ChatGPT, but safer, more responsible, more specific technologies that can help us maybe identify risk or cancer detection a bit quicker and accurately, or help protect our biodiversity, or help identify and address pandemics. So I'm not a pessimistic completely, but just precisely because of this potential, that's where we should focus on. And I want to go through the risks so that then we can focus our energy on the good things, hopefully. So the first risk I wanted to flag is on rights and democratic integrity. Think, for example, on how AI-driven personalized news feeds can have an impact on polarization in views held in society, or how the scaling up of disinformation and misinformation can affect us, how we relate to each other, what we believe and who we don't believe. It's getting easier to generate deep fakes, harder to identify, and think also about surveillance and how it's already being used, infringing human rights and existing privacy regulations, or taking advantage of some vacuums in regulation. And this is a helpful list from the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. which lists some of these potential areas of impact. One is how it can compromise our information ecosystem, how it can subvert public consultation processes. There's been some countries who've already said, we're doing scraping of all social media, therefore we know what the public thinks. We are listening to the public, and this is really worrying, in addition to all the privacy violations, etc., like thinking that that's a way of really understanding what people think. The way that's expanding surveillance, affecting potentially electoral processes, and we are building evidence on this. In some countries are more resilient to that, some less, and in general impacting the political discourse, damaging social cohesion and concentrating power and increasing inequality. And we should ask ourselves, and actually a few media outlets were asking this last summer with the riots, the far-right extremist riots in the UK. They were asking, what's the role of AI in that? And I'm not saying that's the cause, that's a very complex issue, what we are living in the world today with the far-right. But I think we do need to ask ourselves, how may AI be helping amplify the drivel, and the misinformation and the narratives that are feeding that? Okay, risk 2, the climate emergency. If you ask me, I'd be talking about climate more than AI. I think we're really in trouble. We don't have, I think, much time in terms of the state of our environment and our planet. But let's see the role that AI could play in that. So in 2023, ChatGPT gulped 500 milliliters of water for every 5 to 50 prompts. So, if you worry about taking a flight, we also need to worry about what happens every time we're using a prompt or one of these LLMs. And LLMs produce vast amounts of carbon dioxide across its various stages of, training, inference, storage, experimentation. Google's emissions climbed 50% in 5 years due to AI energy demand, and have already said that they will not be able to meet their climate targets. And in fact, yesterday I was reading an article in The Guardian which said that these figures are actually grossly underrepresented and that the impact is even much, much higher. I think it was 6.5 times much higher. So there is also hope that AI could help us mitigate the climate emergency. The evidence on this is still mixed, but if it can help us, then we need to focus our energy on that, I think, and really try and focus on technologies that can really help us address these problems. Okay, risk 3 on economic and social inequalities. So it can do that in different ways. Think, for example, of job mobility and job automation. Some of us or some parts of society might be able to adapt easier to changes in the work environment. So for some groups in society, this might not be a problem at all. But, some groups will be in disadvantage because they have less resources to learn, adapt, find other options. So the gap in inequalities might only be amplified. And this impact is also related to bias in discrimination in the algorithms, who is decided based on algorithm decision-making processes to be worthy of a loan or not, or of a scholarship, or of a job interview or not. So this can also have an impact in this sense. And then let's talk also of labor exploitation. We know, for example, that many AI models have been trained through the work of many data labelers based in countries like Kenya in less than acceptable working and pay conditions. Okay, risk 4, bias and discrimination. Actually, already in 2016, mathematician Cathy O'Neill said that algorithms are nothing more than opinions embedded in code. And I already mentioned what happens when algorithms make assumptions about, who will commit fraud or who will get a job or not based on labels that are coded depending on whether, the color of our skin or what neighborhood we live in or our surname. So, and this is, of course, linked to many risks, healthcare, economic risks, as I've just mentioned, but also amplifying existing oppressions like violence against women, LGBTQ plus phobia, disability, all sorts of existing inequalities. I hope you've already seen that video, but if you haven't, I'll try and play it now. I hope the Wi-Fi works. If not, you can take note and watch it later. And if you have it doesn't matter. I get never tired of looking at it. So let's give it a go.
My heart smiles as I bask in their legacies, knowing their lives have altered many destinies. In her eyes, I see my mother's poise. In her face, I glimpse my auntie's grace. In this case of deja vu, a 19th century question comes into view. In a time when Sojourner Truth asked, "Ain't I a woman?" Today, we pose this question to new powers, making bets on artificial intelligence, hope towers. The Amazonians peek through windows blocking deep blues as faces increment scars. Old burns, new urns, collecting data chronicling our past, often forgetting to deal with gender, race, and class. Again, I ask, ain't I a woman? Face by face, the answers seem uncertain. Young and old, proud icons are dismissed. Can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? Ida B. Wells, data science pioneer, hanging facts, stacking stats on the lynching of humanity, teaching truths hidden in data, each entry and omission, a person worthy of respect. Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, the first Black Congresswoman, but not the first to be misunderstood by machines well-versed in data-driven mistakes. Michelle Obama, unabashed and unafraid to wear her crown of history, yet her crown seems a mystery to systems unsure of her hair. A wig, a bouffant, a toupee, maybe not. Are there no words for our braids and our locks? Does relaxed hair and sunny skin make Oprah the first lady? Even for her face well known, some algorithms fault her, echoing sentiments that strong women are men. We laugh, celebrating the successes of our sisters with Serena smiles. No label is worthy of our beauty.
Okay, so I'll move on to another type of risks, which I think relate to our human identity, our agency, and our autonomy. You know, many people are trying to do research now on that. What happens when our interactions with healthcare providers, with public services in our neighborhood, even with our friends or lovers, are mediated by AI technologies? And how does it impact our human capabilities, you know, our capacity to connect, you know, how we make sense of each other through maybe our eyes, our voice, our gestures. And I'm not saying it's always negative. I'm just saying we really need to ask how it might change that. Because also, if we focus on the research that has been done with the public attitudes research, which I was doing a lot with in my previous role as well, people consistently raise their concerns about the loss of empathy and the human touch when they, for example, talk with a doctor or other types of important interactions. So, you know, the narratives about AI are always about efficiency, convenience, how we save time, how we save money. But, you know, how about well-being? How about justice, human connection, you know? How is this focus on efficiency changing our mental frameworks and how we organize our societies? So that's, I think, another question that we need to ask. Finally, if we put all these risks in the geopolitical context, I shared an example of the exploitation of workers in Kenya for labeling and training models. This quote by Keone Mahilona, which is the Chief Technology Officer at Te Hiku Media, which is a Maori-led initiative in New Zealand. I'll mention that later. They are working to revitalize the Maori language. Expressed this concern very clearly. He says data is the last frontier of colonization. And the problem is more philosophical and transcendental in terms of what types of ways of seeing the world we are encouraging and amplifying through especially generative AI technologies, Which data from where, in what languages is feeding AI? And think now about how foundation models who are generating all the models are amplifying that. I recently attended a talk by academics from different countries in the African continent, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa. And they were talking about African philosophies and worldviews. They are diverse, but generally they share a focus on the community and how we relate to each other. They are called Afro-communitarianism. And they were saying how these value systems, which are quite different from the more individualistic models that we have at this moment in many countries, how they are challenging the ways of seeing the world in their own countries. But also they were talking about how these ethical frameworks can be helpful in how we design technologies and how we regulate the technologies. But at this moment, we're not really involving enough diverse communities from the world to be able to do that. And here, there's a quote from a paper called AI Empire, which I think it's also makes a good point in relation to that. It says, as long as the roots of AI empire, heteropatriarchy, racial capitalism, white supremacy, and modernity coloniality, and its mechanisms, extractivism, automation, essentialism, surveillance, and containment, remain intact, any proposed solution will merely serve as a cosmetic fix. Instead, we must form collective movements to degroup, uproot these intersecting systems, and critically evaluate the often unquestioned assumption that technological progress is synonymous with social and planetary good. No piece of generative AI technology, no matter how advanced, can ever do this critical work for us. Okay, another risk is around the misuse of data. I think if used responsibly, data has a lot of potential to unlock the problems that we're facing in the world today. But at the moment, it's not really being harnessed in that way, at least not enough. It's being, for example, Microsoft's AI CEO, Mustafa Suleyman, said recently that there's this kind of understanding that anything, or this implicit rule of the game, that anything that's on the web today, it's okay for companies to use to train AI models. So data is being extracted for private interests, either without the care for existing IP rules, or if there's no IP rules, then for the legitimate ownership and data sovereignty, and kept in silos purely to serve specific powers rather than unlocked. To solve, for example, how we move in a city, or how we make better use of our energy sources, etc. So I think there's a risk that data is being co-opted for uses that serve certain interests rather than for the public goods. Okay, I'll stop talking about risks. Where do we want to go? Some positives, maybe some potential pathways for the way forward. First of all, I'll say we need regulation. We've been regulating the food industry, the medical industry, the aviation industry, yet at the moment we're letting AI developers and deployers go ahead, deploying some questionable systems that are causing harms in a regulatory vacuum. I think if we think about it, a few companies have more access to data and power and capital than any country, actually. So I think whether you look at it from a narrow safety lens, or whether you look at it from a more holistic kind of human well-being and justice lens, it just doesn't make sense. I think that we go on like that. But anyways, beyond regulation, I think we need to reclaim our agency, to envision the worlds that we want. We need to invest capital and time in research, in collective engagements, to put people at the center of decision-making, to deliberate on, how do we want to live together? How should we make use of money, of technology? What societies do we want? And then, only then, how can different AI and data-driven systems help there or not? But at the moment, we're really starting the other way around, I think. And here's a quote by Ruha Benjamin. You may have read Race After Technology, one of her books, who says what we need is greater investment in socially just imaginaries. This, I think, would have to entail a socially conscious approach to tech development that would require prioritizing equity over efficiency, social good over market imperatives. And there are exciting examples, of things that are happening, people who are doing that. I already mentioned, for example, HoC24, which is a New Zealand-based organization. They have established data sovereignty protocols to create AI platforms in Maori language, and they've done it in a way that is participatory, sharing the ownership with the Maori community. There's also, for example, I'll talk about something else later, but I wanted to talk about another thing we need to do, I think, to move forward, which is public participation. We need to embed public participation in tech development, in policy development, in key decisions that are being made at the moment at every stage of the AI life cycle. And there's a quote here by Alondra Nelson in a recent interview that makes this point. No? She says, inclusion is both a mandate for how to conduct science in a democracy, but also for better science policy. We are less likely to make design mistakes and more likely to broaden our horizons or our aperture for scientific discoveries when we include a range of perspectives. If we think about all the impacts and the risks that I've just mentioned before, impacts on our media landscape, our health, our healthcare, our work, it just doesn't make sense that these such important decisions are being made in the way that they're being made now. And there's things happening in this sense in terms of involving the publics. Recently, Belgium, actually, where we are now just held a citizens' assembly on AI that's meant to recommend and guide the government in how to use and regulate AI technologies. And there's also discussions now with civil society, academics, public sector, and governments on setting up a permanent global citizens' assembly, including one on data and AI. There was one 3 years ago on the climate and the environment, and now this group is trying to broaden the conversation so that we can set up a permanent one. Okay. Another thing we need to do, I think, it's ecosystems for responsible and sustainable reuse of data. I've mentioned the silos with how data is being used today and the power asymmetries. So I think we need to address that, and I think we can do that through meaningful consent processes when we are using data, creating a social license for data reuse, which acknowledges people as owners or co-owners of the data and their agency on what should be done with that. We need data governance and stewardship processes in private companies, in organizations, in data trusts and data intermediaries, so that there can be legitimate custodians of data to ensure that it's being governed democratically and used in responsible ways. And we need to sort out the problem of interoperability as well. At the moment, this is a huge problem. We need to break silos for responsible and agile data reuse by designing models that can be understood and used by a range of applications and users. Okay, and we need transparent, collaborative, and anti-oppressive data science. As Lou said earlier, it's not easy to know what open means today. It can mean many things. And with generative AI now, this is blurring many boundaries, and it's getting even more difficult to know what's open or not. But there are alternatives. I've mentioned Te Hiku Media in New Zealand. There's also the work of people like Catherine D'Ignazio and the team around the work doing counter data science, to claim back the narratives and the evidence using data that existing models are not addressing, and doing it in intersectional and justice-centered ways, which I think it's what's key. There's, for example, the Design Justice Network principles. That's now a few years old, but I think they're always a go-to to think about how we are designing technologies or anything else, really, in a way that centers justice and people. But in terms of doing things differently, especially in your space, I think you know a lot better. Maybe cases, experiences, what to do than I do. So I'll look forward to learning from the talks and the workshops in the next 2 days and hearing many examples of this. But I'll leave it here for now. So thank you so much for listening.